a modern person is thrown into a field at minus 40 degrees, their heart stops within 30 minutes. Even if you wear state-of-the-art thermal clothing, if the wind blows, your body heat slips away helplessly. However, 30,000 years ago, when the middle of a frozen hell with not a single tree or cave, a tribe built a house, raised children, and survived the winter. And that wasn't just for a year or two, but for thousands of years. They dug a hole in the ground to create heating, filled the walls with insulation, and drilled a ventilation hole in the ceiling. Technology that would appear in a modern architecture textbook was unearthed from a 30,000-year-old site. In an era without vortex concrete or electricity, what on earth did they know? Those we called primitive people might actually have been humanity's first engineers. Let us also delve into the designs of primitive humans that left even archaeologists speechless. When I hear the word Ice Age, snow-covered mountain ranges or frozen lakes come to mind. However, the actual Ice Age was much more brutal than that. The key was a wind, a biting wind of over 60 miles per hour, swept across the plains, and the wind chill dropped below minus 60 degrees. In this environment, human skin suffers frostbite within 10 minutes, and the cold entering the lungs paralyzes the airways. Even modern polar explorers find it difficult to last an hour without full equipment. However, humans during the Ice Age had neither Gore-Tex nor insulated tents. All they had were animal hides, stones, and bones. So we've believed this for a long time. Ice Age humans likely lived hiding in caves as they blocked the wind, minimized temperature fluctuations, and controlled access by wild animals. Textbooks and documentaries also taught that. It seemed like a reasonable inference. They said that cave paintings were the evidence. After all, Lasker's, Altamira, and Chauvet are all paintings found inside caves. However, a question arises here. Were caves real as such a perfect refuge? Could they have lived in them for thousands of years? To find the answer, you have to go inside the cave yourself. The idea that caves are perfect shelters is a modern misconception. In reality, the inside of the Ice Age cave was not as warm as one might think. It is better than being outside, but spending the winter in a space that fluctuates between 5 below and 10 below zero without heating is close to torture. Furthermore, most caves are humid, cold moisture drains body heat much faster than dry cold. You ask Cohen, you just light a fire? If you light a fire in a cave, the smoke cannot escape. It pulls on the ceiling, presses down on the walls, and eventually enters your lungs. It was the worst possible condition for long-term residents, but there was a separate, decisive problem. Caves exist only in specific terrains. They are not found just anywhere, only in limestone areas, volcanic zones, or coastal cliffs. However, the mammoths and reindeer that humans had to chase during the Ice Age moved across the vast plains. If the prey goes north, people must go north too. If you are tied to a cave, hunting itself becomes impossible. Ultimately, for humans during the Ice Age, caves could serve as temporary shelters, but they could not become a permanent home. Then what was the alternative? Building a house yourself in the middle of the plains. The problem was the materials. The glacial plains are tundra zones. Tall trees could not grow, and even the shrubs that managed to grow well were too weak to be used as building materials. Stone is heavy and difficult to process. Stone houses were not practical for a life where they had to move constantly, a situation where there are no trees and no stones. The options remaining for them were extremely limited. The first thing humans did during the Ice Age was dig the ground. They weren't simply trying to avoid the wind. They knew that there was heat in the ground. The surface temperature drops to minus 40 degrees, but if you dig down just 3 feet, the temperature rises above freezing. At a depth of 6 feet, it remains around 50 degrees year-round. This is exactly the principle of a geothermal heat pump in modern architecture, drawing heat contained within the ground. It is impossible that humanity understood this principle as a theory 30,000 years ago. However, they learned it through experience. They felt it in their bodies that it was less cold if they dug the ground. Looking at the excavated ruins, most of them show traces of the ground being dug to a depth of about a foot and a half to 3 feet. In some cases, they dug down to nearly 6 feet. At this depth, the internal temperature can be maintained above freezing regardless of the outside temperature. It is the exact same strategy as modern passive houses using Earth's energy to reduce heating costs. They just used a bone shovel and their own pens instead of an electric pump. This is not the end. The sunken floor had another advantage. Cold air is heavy and warm air is light. When a fire is lit in a sunken floor structure, warm air rises and heats the entire living space. When geothermal heat rising from the ground combines with radiant heat from the fire, a world completely different from the outside minus 40 degrees is created. It maximized heating efficiency solely through its structure. Once heat starts rising from the floor, the next problem is trapping that heat, or roof. was needed. What the Ice Age humans focused on were the corpses of mammoths scattered throughout the plains. One bone weighs 200 pounds, a jawbone pair weighs 400 pounds, and even just one femur is thicker and longer than an adult male's thigh. The bones of mammoths who died of natural causes or were hunted were preserved intact without rotting thanks to the cold. The construction method was surprisingly systematic. First, lay the foundation by arranging the skulls in a circular shape. The skull was heavy and flat, making it suitable for compacting the house. On top of that, erect the femurs and jawbones in an alternating pattern to create a dome-shaped skeleton. The jawbones are naturally curved, so an arch structure can be created without separate processing. An arch is a structure that distributes the load to both sides. It is the same principle used in modern architecture for bridges or cathedral roofs. One dwelling excavated at the Mizrach site used the bones of 95 mammoths. The total weight alone was over 20 tons. The large bone was long and sturdy, making it suitable for use as a vertical column. Large structures that would have been impossible with wood were possible with bone. What is interesting is that the arrangement of the bones was not random. Bones of the same type were placed in the same location and classified by size. It means there was a design in advance. It wasn't built haphazardly. They knew exactly which bone to use where. Seeing that not just one but several houses were built to similar specifications, this knowledge has been passed down across generations. If the skeletal framework was complete, all that remained was to fill in the gaps. A house is not finished just because you have built a framework with bones. There are gaps between the bones, and if the wind comes in through those gaps, it is no use digging the ground. Ice Age humans solved this problem with a triple layer of insulation. From the inside to the outside, each layer took on a different role. The innermost part was lined with reindeer fur. The fur holds air. The layers of air trapped between the dense hairs act as insulation. It works on the same principle as modern wool comforters or down quilts. When a person's body heats, this layer of air heat does not escape easily. On top of that, they filled it thickly with dried grass and moss. It has the property of absorbing moisture. When people breathe in, cook food indoors, steam is generated, and this layer absorbs it. If moisture accumulates on the walls, mold grows, and the wet air quickly draws away body heat. The moss layer blocked this. The outermost layer was covered with a mat woven from reeds or tough grass. This outer layer served as an outer shell that directly blocked wind and snow. The important point is that the three layers were separated. The fine a layer is formed between the layers. The insulation effect is doubled. The reason double pane windows are effective in modern architecture is also due to the layer between the two panes of glass. Ice Age humans implemented this principle using leather and grass instead of glass. The structure that releases moisture to the outside and traps heat inside. They already accomplished what modern vortex does 30,000 years ago. However, if you light a fire in a confined space, a new problem arises. The more perfect the insulation, the more difficult ventilation becomes. If you block all the gaps, air will not circulate. When a fire is lit in a confined space, smoke fills the room, oxygen decreases, and carbon monoxide accumulates. Even in modern times, accidents resulting in loss of life frequently occur while lighting a stove inside a sealed tent. There's no way that humanity did not know this problem 30,000 years ago. As they accumulated experiences of coughing and stinging eyes in smoky spaces, they began to design airflow. The solution was surprisingly simple yet sophisticated. A small hole was drilled at the top of the support structure. Air has the property of rising. When a fire is lit inside, the heated air rises to the ceiling and escapes through the hole at the top. At the same time, a gap was left at a low position near the entrance to allow cold air to enter. This creates a natural flow where cold air enters from below and hot air exits from above. It is the exact same principle as the stack effect ventilation system used in modern architecture. What is even more surprising is that the ventilation system was adjustable. According to recent experimental archaeological research, it is presumed that there was a leather covering the hole at the top. It was a method of covering the hole to prevent heat loss when the wind was strong or the temperature dropped too low and opening it to ventilate when smoke built up. It is essentially a kind of manual damper. This sense of balance, which retains heat while circulating air, was the very essence of Ice Age architecture. Once the body was taken care of, all that remained was the mind. The Ice Age winter lasted for 6 months. People had to lie trapped in narrow spaces during the long darkness when the sun rarely rose. No matter how much heating and ventilation there was, if you see the same face for half a year and cannot even go outside, people will break down. According to modern research, depression and interpersonal conflicts are surging among crew members overwintering at Antarctic research bases. An environment without light, restricted movement, and no change is fatal to the human psyche. Humans during the Ice Age also had to fight this problem. An interesting pattern can be seen when looking at the excavated ruins. The interior of the dwelling was clearly divided into sections. The space for lighting a fire and cooking, the workspace for making and maintaining tools, and the sleeping area for lying down and resting were separated. They each secured their own territory even in a confined space. This is not simply a matter of convenience. When the boundaries of personal space collapse in a crowded environment, stress explodes. Spatial separation was a survival strategy for maintaining psychological distance. The work of making tools and ornaments was not a simple production activity either. Carving bone to make needles, engraving patterns on ivory, and molding small statues keeps the hands busy and requires concentration. It is highly likely that Venus figurines or animal sculptures found in Ice Age sites were psychological survival tools before they were products of artistic impulse. They poured the boredom and depression into the fingertips. The technology that saved the body also took care of the mind. Then where did all this wisdom go? This architecture disappeared as the Ice Age ended. About 12,000 years ago, the Earth's temperature began to rise. Mammoths went extinct and forests grew in the frozen tundra. There was no longer any reason to build a house out of bones. Trees grew and we became able to live without digging deep into the ground. As the environment changed, humanity forgot the technology. Knowledge accumulated over tens of thousands of years could not be passed down to the next generation and was buried underground. It has been less than 100 years since we rediscovered this building. However, just because the tradition was broken doesn't mean it disappeared. The principles discovered by humans during the Ice Age are being used in modern architecture as they are. Heating utilizing geothermal energy has become a core technology of passive houses, and insulation using air gaps is applied to all modern buildings. The load distribution principle of the dome structure is alive in stadium and airports, and natural ventilation systems have become the standard for eco-friendly architecture. Come to think of it, our ancestors' on-dole or on-the-floor heating was also an engineering that combined geothermal and radiant heat. The principle was discovered tens of thousands of years ago, and only the materials have changed. Recently, Ice Age architecture is being studied again in the field of disaster preparedness. This is because technology is needed to build shelters using only local materials in extreme situations where there is no electricity and materials are scarce. We called them primitive people, but they were engineers who survived the harshest environments in human history. Technology may change, but the logic of survival does not disappear. If you found today's video informative and entertaining, please subscribe and like. It is a huge help to the channel.